Hi everybody, and welcome once again to one of my training webinars where we bring on experts who know their stuff, and also where I discuss some of the business strategies that I've been working on, whether they're joint ventures or business growth. And I'm really excited for this training webinar we have, because this is my favorite subject. Alongside joint ventures, I also get involved in licensing, and this training webinar we have today is all about seven-figure licensing. And the reason why I'm really excited is because I have two expert guests and friends on this training webinar today who are people that I refer onto basically my joint venture consultants, where I do my joint venture training, my high-level training. We touch on elements of licensing, but I also refer my joint venture consultants to these two guys here, Rand Brenner and Mitch Axelrod, founders of the IP Licensing Academy. And I'm really excited to have these guys here because they're going to blow your mind and show you what's possible from the world of licensing, and especially IP licensing. So first of all, Rand and Mitch, great to have you guys here. Thank you very much for coming.
Great. Thanks for having us.
Excellent. And so what I'm going to thank you. And what I'm going to do right now then, guys, I'm going to pass over the controls to you, Rand, so we can get this training webinar started. So there you go. I've just made you presenter. You should see that coming on your screen.
Okay, I see it. The controls are mine now, and all I have to do is get to the right screen. There we are. And
guys,
okay.
Sorry, and guys, there will be opportunity for questions at the end. So please put your questions in the chat box throughout, and I'll get the opportunity to ask those questions to both Rand and Mitch at the end. Guys, take it away, and I'll be here in the background if you need me. Cheers.
Okay. Thanks, Sohail. Thank you, and welcome everybody who's joining us here. My name is Rand Brenner, and welcome to Seven-Figure Money-Making Licensing Secrets. We're very excited to have the opportunity to join with you and to work with Sohail. He's got a very exciting platform and what you're doing on JV brokering, and so today what we're going to be talking about is licensing, basically a resource, a tool, a money-making opportunity for all of you that fits nicely with what you're doing in the world of JV brokering. So what we'll start off with is, let's just give you a bit of an idea of what we're going to be discussing today as it relates to JVs and licensing. And one of the first things is that licensing deals, and I'm sure many of you probably are seeing that crossover now as you've been working with your clients and prospective opportunities, that licensing may be popping up in the conversation or the discussions. And really it's part of the licensing process, because, as I said, many times they do evolve from these licensing deals. And so it's a natural add-in as part of a JV strategy, is licensing IP, and we'll talk about why, you know, what the upside opportunity really is in this world of licensing IP, especially in terms of what you can do with it as a strategy. It obviously makes sense that licensing is a nice synergy and overlay to what you're doing. And a big part of this, of course, and one of the most exciting parts, is the additional revenue opportunities that can be created through JVs using licensing. Mitch, you have any comments here?
Yeah, I really. But when I started in this about 20-plus years ago, I had no idea this game existed. And I was very much sitting in your seat. I was very much involved in joint ventures. I've been in business 35 years, and almost all the business I've done over the 35 years has been done as a joint venture or with joint venture partners. And when I realized that there was this whole new game of intellectual property, it really rocked my world. And for the past 20-plus years, I've really not been in the information game. I've been in the IP game. And so today, what we really want to do is get you into a space where open you up to a whole new world of opportunity and possibility. So as you go along today, maybe take some notes along the way as to how you might apply what we're talking about to some of the existing joint venture opportunities that you have, or possibly use licensing and intellectual property as a lever to open up new opportunities. So we're going to making now, and why joint venture, JV, and IP is really a perfect synergistic match, all right? So, so start to take some notes as we talk about how you might apply some of what we're talking about here today.
Okay. And so let's start off. What we'll do is we'll start off with give you a quick introduction to Mitch and I, give you a little more background. My background is I come out of the entertainment industry. I started my career in licensing at Warner Brothers. And by the way, I got into this business quite by accident. There wasn't any, training, resources, school, or anything. And what happened is that many people don't realize, but it wasn't until the late 80s that the entertainment industry, studios, movies in particular, started to recognize the value of licensing and intellectual property. Up until that point, it was really relegated to the back end and thought of as just a stepchild. And so when I joined Warner Brothers, movies. And that's really how I got my start, and it was really kind of learning as I went. So I had an opportunity while at Warner Brothers. I worked in the first two Batman movies, putting together toys, T-shirts, hats, and Looney Tunes and Gremlins and Rover Dangerfield and a whole bunch of different movie properties, and worked with different manufacturers. And from there, I joined Saban Entertainment, where I ran the licensing division for a number of years at the height of the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. Now, for those of you with kids, you're probably most familiar with a number of these properties. But what was happening at that point in time is that licensing had really come to the forefront for the movie industry. All of a sudden, what was considered a nothing business was suddenly generating hundreds of millions of dollars for the studios, and suddenly merchandise was taking, the front seat on a lot of these deals. After I left the studios, I set up my own company, manufacturers looking to acquire licenses and those property owners that have IP and want to license it out. And what basically I do is work with IP owners, companies, businesses in going out and making money with their IP, which is what we're going to be talking about today, how you can use this process of licensing, which is basically a money-making system for IP, and how you can use that system with your joint venture partners to create more revenue opportunities for you. So along the way, as we discuss with some of the ways you can use licensing in joint venture partners, I'll share with you some of the stories and case studies of the deals that I've worked on, so that you can see exactly how you can use this and apply it to your respective deals.
Well, my journey actually was a little different than Rand's. I've started out as a financial planner, and I evolved into what is now considered the speaking, consulting, coaching business. And I was a full-time trainer and speaker for 7 years. And what I realized early on was that my intellect, my intellectual property, was really valuable, and I kind of stumbled into it like Rand did by accident. I was doing a seminar in New York, and I recorded everything back then, and I still do. And the guy came up to me afterwards, and he said, I want that recording. And I didn't actually have a product. Today everybody has an information product, and I just was really a speaker. And I said, what do you want to do with it? And he said, I want to send 5,000 of those audio cassettes to my customers. And I realized at that moment, this was 1991, actually 1990, I realized at that moment that I was not in the information business. I wasn't even a speaker, an author, or a trainer. I was in the intellectual property business. And so I made a decision at that point, rather than creating information and rather than selling my products and services to companies, I decided that I was going to collaborate. And so my licensing career kind of started just kind of by happenstance going into it, and over the past 20-plus years, I've done dozens of licensing deals. It's interesting, there's nothing you cannot sell that you cannot license. So if you can sell it, you can license it. And I found with some of the companies that you see on the screen, especially the bigger companies, they were much more excited about a collaboration to be able to leverage my intellectual property in the way that they wanted to use it as opposed to the way I wanted to sell it. And that's a real big nugget of wisdom I learned early on, something you might want to write down as we go forward, is think about not so much about your products or your services in terms of selling them or someone else's. Think about it as how can you collaborate with partners so that you can actually deliver. And you'll see a little bit more as we talk about some of my stories. So I've licensed really millions of dollars of intellectual property to very big companies and very small companies, some companies for $500, $1,000, and other companies for 5 and 6 figures. So I've been in the game 22 years. I learned it all by the seat of my pants, and I really never had somebody like us to kind of light the way for me. So that's my short history of how I got into the licensing game and continue to play it today.
And
so, go ahead.
Go ahead. No,
I was going to say some of the insights that we've learned along the way. We want to share some of these because if you understand the value of intellectual property, you begin to see opportunities everywhere. And so we've prepared a few insights that we've learned along the way about what intellectual property means and what the opportunities are. And so we want to share some of those with you now.
I think IP is the #1 capital asset in the world. There's more intellectual property than there is of anything else out there, whether it's real estate, stock, bonds, gold. It is a multi-trillion-dollar market, okay? And many people don't realize that, and a lot of that has to do because we live in a tangible economy, or we have lived in a tangible economy. We're now shifting into an intangible economy, and that shift is moving rapidly. And as we shift into that intangible economy, what stands out is where that wealth is being created, and it's being created through intellectual property. And it's also an underutilized and undercapitalized asset that's out there. In fact, you'll find most businesses today are not leveraging their intellectual property. In fact, many of the JV deals that you're working on today, you might find intellectual property that's in there. And a lot of because they don't recognize intellectual property. I mean, part of the challenge is recognizing it, #1, and then, of course, there's another aspect to that, and that's many business owners, and I'm talking about small all the way up to Fortune 500, how to make money with it, what they need to do to manage it. And that's one of the biggest reasons that 95% of IP is never making money, because most of the time no one is doing anything with it, or they have it and they're very limited in what they're doing. I mean, oftentimes it may not be uncommon for you to meet with a company, put a JV partnership together with a focus on saying, we've got this proprietary product or service, and we're the only ones out there because we have an IP that keeps others from doing it. Yet that's only a very small part of the total value of what could be done out there with it. And you know, there's big demand for IP. In fact, it's all about intellectual property. And the real opportunity here is, and we're going to talk about it more, is the fact that there is a growing demand for people that understand how to manage and do licensing deals, to advise, consult, direct, broker, okay? And that's where a real big opportunity is having that know-how, because if you have that know-how, that money, what it is, it's a skill set. Okay, understanding the money-making skill set for IP, that's known as licensing, that really is going to elevate your marketability and your value to what you are offering your clients.
Yeah, and if you think about wealth for a second, and what you're actually trying to create as a joint venture partner, or a joint venture broker, or maybe whatever role you're playing in the joint venture game, there's really 3 kinds of wealth. Or 3 kinds of income. There's active income, where you work for it, you trade time. Not trade time for money. The idea is to trade your time for maximum money, because we all do it. But then there's passive income, and then there's residual income. And most of the time in the past that I've experienced joint ventures are phenomenal. One of the best ways to create active income. Not often can you create a joint venture that will create passive income, and it's even rarer for you to create a joint venture that continues on and on for years and years and years and pays you residuals. But when you look at licensing and you look at intellectual property, there's a huge opportunity there to create all three kinds of income. One deal, and we'll share some of these stories with you so you can get a sense of what's possible. So with intellectual property, you can walk into every joint venture opportunity or every client or every possibility and say, how can I create the maximum active income, passive income, and residual income? And really, when you think about it, all it takes is a deal potentially to set you up for years and years and years. So start to recognize that as a money-making capital asset, there may not be one asset in the world that's more flexible, more malleable, and produce all three kinds of income for you, and in some cases with one single deal. And it has for me, and I know it has for Rand, and it has for hundreds and dozens of our clients. So, and that leads us to some numbers we want to share with you, not to blow your mind, but to blow your mind, just to firm up the size of this industry, which we basically call a $1 trillion industry. So Rand, why don't you share some of these numbers, because when you shared these with me, it absolutely got my attention, blew my mind, and made me want to jump back into this game with both feet.
I think that, one of the things that's overlooked, and even in the mainstream media it's overlooked, is just the enormity of what's going on within exists out there. And a lot of that is because, intellectual property and licensing is not in the mainstream vernacular of everybody. It's not something that everybody understands, yet it is so enormous in what it is creating and what can be created from it that it truly is one that leads you to step back. And the one thing that I want to qualify by these numbers is while there's a lot of data to confirm this, there is also a lot of unknown and hidden intellectual property that sits on the shelves in companies and universities around the world. So when you look at some of these numbers, $180 billion, that is the estimated annual demand for IP in some form, whether it's trademarks, copyrights, patents, by companies and businesses around the world. $180 billion. In the U.S. alone, it's estimated that intellectual property accounts for 40% of the economy. Now think about that for a moment. 40% of the for a moment and look around, and everything that you see, use, wear, touch, eat, smell, work with, look at, get entertainment, it's all intellectual property. Many people don't realize it, but I like to say is if you start looking through the world through intellectual property mindset or the eyes of IP, you're suddenly going to be amazed how much intellectual property surrounds you. And when you step back and look at it that way, you see that there is an unlimited opportunity that exists for people that understand how to take this IP and make money with it. And it truly is trillions of dollars. In fact, one estimate in the research out there estimates that every year over $1 trillion is lost, is wasted by companies that fail to extract the value of IP through partnerships, through licensing partners, through joint venture partnerships. $1 trillion. And that's just based on what they can figure out from, the statistics that come in, and it's probably much higher than that. What does that say? That says that there is yourselves who understand the IP licensing game and how to make money with it. And, just to give you a sense of how much money is being made, just in trademark and patent licensing royalty revenue from 2010, you're talking over $5.5 billion. And keep in mind, like I said, a lot of these statistics, there are many, many private companies, small private companies, mid-sized private companies where they don't even get the information. The information isn't even available. And you could probably add another 20 or 30% on top of this because of those transactions go on that nobody knows about. And it's a growing market. It is booming. This is an opportunity that is moving along very, very fast. In fact, in 2011, worldwide, there were more patents and trademark applications filed than in the history of all of application filings. Over 6.3 million applications. That's for that doesn't even count the tens of millions of intellectual property that exist already, that are coming through, that are coming to market. And the opportunity for you, especially being a JV broker who are inside working with these companies, is you could be mining this. That's what you'll become, a miner, and you will be able to extract a lot of value, not only for your partners, for yourself. Mitch, some comments?
Yeah, well, it was, I've been in the game for 20 plus years, and when you shared with me the size and scope of what's here, it really just got my brain going electric, and part of what we want to really get across to you today is that you only need a small piece of this, and you can literally stumble upon these opportunities by walking down to your local mall, going into an office complex, looking at your Rolodex, advantage, because you will be one of the only people who knows how to talk about IP. You're going to be able to give a better return to your clients, and there's so many positive payoffs here for you to jump in this game, and we really just wanted to help you see the size and the scope of the opportunity. We only want a small piece of it. Obviously, we want a bigger piece as you can get, but it's so much bigger than us, and this is part of why we want to really help people to understand the value of IP and what to do with it. So, I was going to say, in order for you to kind of get a sense of that, we're going to start to share some of these stories, not so much to, show you what we've done, but to help you to demonstrate the range of possibilities that are out there and to stir your brain, because really you only need one of these to set you up for life. So if you're as excited about this market opportunity as I am, then what you're going to find in the next few minutes that we share with you are some huge holes in the market and fill right away.
Yeah, and Mitch is so right. I mean, the one thing that I can tell you is that the opportunity to make enormous money is just beginning with intellectual property. We're just scraping the tip of the iceberg, and it literally is an iceberg that's probably about 98% submerged right now, but will be coming to the surface very quickly. And so what we're going to talk about now are specific licensing strategies for JV that you can use in putting together and working within your current joint venture partnerships. And so one of the first things to understand about licensing is you can use licensing within your joint ventures to create revenues without producing anything, okay? Otherwise known as a straight licensing deal. And the example I'll give you here, one of the projects that I worked with was, you may recognize this lady who's become probably more famous since she's passed than she was alive, but Marilyn Monroe. And this is really about photographs. And, if there's ever a market that has really seen an explosion in opportunities through licensing, it's been anything to do with media and anything to do with digital and photography in question. But really what the opportunity here is a JV is if you've got a JV partnership and you've got a product, a technology, a service, and you're addressing one specific market with it. Let's say it's business, health clinics or consumer products or consulting services or yoga services or whatever the case is. You need to step back and take a look at that product, service, technology and say, where else can we go with it? But you need to look at it as an IP, not in its tangible form. That's probably one of the most challenging things. So when we look at the photographs of Marilyn, one of the things that you can approach it, and this could be Marilyn, this could be a new widget, this can be a movie, a TV show, a piece of software, you name it. What markets can we go into? What distribution channels can we go into? What may be non-competitive and may have other applications? And when you take that approach, you're able to take a JV partnership, say one that you've already got in place. You may have put one together between two parties and they have a product. You may be able to go back to them and say, look, we've got an opportunity here. You've got intellectual property, and we have a way of expanding that and bringing revenues to you without having to produce and sell anything else. And that's through doing what's called a licensing out JV. okay, where you organize the intellectual property in a way, you present it, and you go out and you find companies and other companies who would be interested in partnering and selling those products, services, or technologies into their respective markets. And by the way, when you license out like this and you go to those companies, this is an entree for you to not only form a licensing partnership with those companies, but this is the first step toward forming more joint ventures. Because by adding in the element of licensing, which you're licensing partner, but you'll be able to see with your licensing partner what other opportunities exist. And think about this, you may be able to do this licensing out deal not only with your original joint venture partner, but the licensing partner that comes along, you may see opportunity there, approach them and say, look, let's do a JV and license out your technology into these markets and do it over and over and over again, okay? And this strategy becomes one that's used revenue. And you, as the JV licensing expert, participate in all those deals, whether you're setting up an escrow account to collect the royalties, whether you're becoming an agent that's directly collecting the revenues, however it is, you get to participate in every aspect of that licensing. And as we go further in, I'll show you other strategies as a way to magnify or multiply the different ways in which you can participate in the licensing revenues.
So the second strategy that we're going to talk about, intellectual property, and this is specifically where I got my start as a knowledge broker, if you will. My background, unlike Rand's in the studios, is my background is like a lot of authors and speakers. I have intellectual property that's more of a know-how. I've written books, I've done training programs. And one of the things I learned early on, and this is an example of it, is that when you're selling something, you tend to package it your way. You put it into a form that's your way, and then you try to sell it. And one of the big reasons 95% of all intellectual property, inventions, you name it, never get monetized is because, for lots of reasons, but one of the reasons is we continue to try to develop and form products in our image. Or we follow the prevailing model, you know, go out, create an info product, get a book, get a tape series, get this. Back in 1996, this was about my, I guess, 12th or 13th licensing deal. I was working with a company who said, we love your training, but is it possible that you could customize it, that you could actually make it look like it's ours, even though it's yours? And what I realized early in the game, and I had done this over and over again from the very beginning, is that most of us in the intellectual property game play the game like we're McDonald's. We give it to people our way. And that creates a difficult process because unless you're really good at selling, it's an awkward thing to try to sell somebody something your way when they want it their way. With intellectual property, the beauty of it is you don't have to package it. You don't necessarily even have to form it. You can customize it. You can private label it. In other words, you can be the Burger King when you're working with intellectual property and give it to people their way. And so with this, dozens of private label deals that I did, rather than me creating a product my way, I literally asked the company, how would you like to collaborate on this? What would you like it to look like? How would you like to present it? And they gave me all the specs for it. And as a collaborative partner, I actually didn't have to make the sale. They helped me because they knew what they wanted to buy. And so the second really important distinction that we want to bring home to you is that once you put something into form, whatever form that is, you're forced to sell that form. Very few buyers will ask you, can I get this in a different form? You know, they'll look at the form, they'll say, okay, we either want to buy it or we don't want to buy it. So once you package something, it becomes a zero-sum game. They either buy it the way you package it or they don't buy it at all. Whereas if you approach this more a collective conversation and you engage in a collaborative, creative, very difficult to sell product and turn it into a very easy to collaborate in intellectual property. And so look at everything that you have as intellectual property. Look at the people around you. Look at some of your joint venture partners who have some hidden intellectual property, but it's stuck inside of a form and they're having trouble selling that form. You might go to them and say, hey, maybe if we change the form, or maybe if we took the essence of the intellectual property behind the form, we could customize it and private label it and deliver it their way. And all of a sudden, conversations open up, opportunities open up, new conversations that were stopped and dead in the water start to get revived and come alive. So strategy number 2 is whenever you have the opportunity, make it their way. Deliver it like Burger King, not like McDonald's.
And let me just comment on that further, because I saw this so often when I was at the studio. Go out to license, whether it's Batman, Power Rangers, and have in our mind that there's certain categories that we're going to fill: toys, T-shirts, hats, whatever it is. Yet oftentimes we were so surprised at some of the entrepreneurs who would come in with a completely different idea or something out of left field that we would have never thought of. And suddenly there was a whole new product category that evolved out of nowhere. And a lot of that has to do, as Mitch said, going in there with that open collaborative mind and seeing what the other party wants, because you would be amazed at what others can see in the intellectual property that sometimes are just not apparent to you. And when you look at what you can do with intellectual property and with licensing, there's a third strategy, and that is that oftentimes you may have a joint venture partner that's been put together. And let's say you're looking for a way to expand that partnership, okay? Distribution, increase its sales, whatever the case is. One of the strategies that you can use licensing for is to acquire the resources you need to make that expansion. I've got several examples of, let me share you some stories. I had a client, they were a toy company that was coming into the United States. They were from Australia, and they had a new technology for preschool remote control, and they wanted to enter the United States and acquire a license. And one of the challenges that they had was distribution. They didn't have any distribution. So one of the things that we did is we used licensing to form a just distribution JV with a big distributor, who then effectively we licensed their distribution capabilities, if you will, that enabled us to go in and reach a certain market. And they got the product at a much better price, and they were given the distribution rights to distribute the product into the marketplace. That spent inside the United States. We were going after Thomas the Tank, but we couldn't get it. But we did know that there were rights available in another market, New Zealand, but they had absolutely no distribution there. So again, what we did is we formed a distribution JV with a company down there, another manufacturer. Basically, we gave them the rights to the technology. They gave us distribution access. We combined resources, got the Thomas license, and went into that market, okay? These are the same strategies that you can use for production. I had a client, they had a new product for, it's a bungee cord, an improvement on a bungee cord. Believe it or not that you could get that. But one of the limitations that they had was manufacturing at a level that they would be able to really go out and make some money in the marketplace. So one of the deals that we did is we found a very large manufacturer who was interested in the product, and after they had a chance to test it, we basically did a license deal, which and you can do these deals in all different ways, but basically what we did is we licensed them the rights to a certain territories that they could sell the product in. In return, they would produce the product for us at a price, you know, that gave us a competitive advantage and let my client get into the retail markets because they didn't have the capability to do it. So we licensed their production resources. Again, I share these with you because this is the way that you can use licensing. It's very flexible. And as you look at your JV deals and you look at the partnerships that you build, keep in mind if you see that there's places that you can go with these JVs where they may be lacking the resource, you can turn around and do a licensing deal to get that resource. And the licensing deal may be that you're creating a second JV whether it's a production or a distribution or sales. And by the way, a combination of these. Another strategy that I would use with my clients, especially if they were smaller and they wanted to get one of these big entertainment startup or a small company, you'd have to have certain what's quote qualifications to be able to get it, distribution, a sales company, administration, whatever. Well, we use licensing as a way to acquire the resources we need and build, if you will, a partnership, to create a partnership that would give us that impression of having all the resources that we need to be able to acquire that brand, okay? And these are all the types of flexible strategies that you can use when licensing. Licensing isn't always about, you know, getting money in return for a specific piece of IP. Oftentimes it is for resources, and resources are often one of the most overlooked forms of using licensing. And you can go beyond this. If you need marketing, if you need finance, if you need equity, it's a very flexible tool. And again, you can introduce this and use this inside any of the JVs that you've currently got, or look to form additional.
And if I could just maybe amplify this in a way too, to look at this, because joint ventures are a perfect example in many cases of triangulation. So Rand talks about OPR, other people's resources, but if you also look at other people's everything, their systems, their approaches, maybe a special technology they've developed, or if you know of authors, or maybe you're an author, maybe you're a knowledge worker, maybe you have somebody with intellectual property in the knowledge space, as a joint venture or as a joint venture broker, you're in the perfect position to triangulate. And when you start to look at how do you put deals together, how do you put people together, you're no longer limited to the current assets that they have. And so when you look at distribution, you look at production, you look at sales, all companies don't recognize it. As a joint venture broker, let's say, and a licensing partner, you can come up with strategies. You could be like the third alternative. And that's a very powerful position to be in when everybody else is trying to sell to everybody else. So look at not just other people's resources, but also look at other people's everything in a way that you might be able to play that third party. And that kind of leads to the next strategy, which is pre-sell for profit. I've got about 50 different what you might call training programs, coaching programs. I call them intellectual properties. I have never paid for a single intellectual property that I own. They have all been pre-sold for profit. And here's an example of one. The typical approach that people take, and many of my colleagues, authors, speakers, trainers, is they first create the intellectual property, or as it's commonly known now as information products, although truly I believe the information product game is coming to an end, and as we've talked about, the intellectual property game is exploding. The traditional method is you create it, you develop it, and you build it, all at your expense, and then you sell it. Well, in 1991, a company hired me to do a program that I had literally nothing more than a table of contents for, called 21 Ways to Double Your Sales. When the company hired me, they asked me a question: can we record this? And at the time, all of my colleagues and my associates said, never let anybody record anything. Why? Well, because we wanted to sell stuff in the back of the room, so to speak. But I actually came at this from a different perspective. I said, sure, go ahead and record it. Little did I know I would never do this seminar again. And fortunately, they recorded it because it came out almost note perfect. And at the said to me, Mitch, we love this program. We'd like to buy 4,000 sets of these and distribute them to our agents, our distributors. And so literally, I never did that seminar again. I only had a table of contents. They spent $40,000. I charged them $10 per recording. I allowed them to private label it. I allowed them to put their own logo on it. 30 days later, they came back to me and said, you know, we really would like a workbook. And so then I licensed them a framework of a workbook that I was putting together for another $40,000. And get this, I never did this seminar again. I did it one time. They recorded it. And so I pre-sold it for profit. And then I created it, built it, and developed it into what you see on the right side, which was my version of 21 Ways. And then we sold another 1,000 of those at $99 into that industry with space ads in industry publications. Now, this is a radical mindset shift. And the opportunity is there for you as a JV broker to see people with intellectual property spending an absolute fortune just to create it, develop it, and build it. And then they have to do the hardest part, which is sell it. Whereas if they pre-sell it to one group, one organization, one company, that company could literally help them create it, build it, develop it, pay for all the expenses, and then it becomes 100% profit. So, you know, who do you know who might have intellectual property, and who do you know that might be a company that would like to support it, finance it, and then literally put those two parties together and pre-sell that for profit in the way that I did 21 Ways to Double Your Sales. And
Mitch, can I just add something there quickly?
Sure.
Yeah, I was just going to say that is an amazing strategy, and I mean, licensing, guys, is just phenomenal. You know, I talk about joint ventures all the time, but this, I mean, and thank you for your comments, guys, by the way, in terms of the training we're having so far. This is absolutely amazing, and I've done something similar myself, taking someone else's licensing content from the US, bringing it to the UK, and literally going from 6 figures to 7 figures in 1 year. So that's amazing stuff, Mitch. Thank you for that.
It's and what Mitch had talked about there in terms of that model, that is the new model for business today. It's all about the creation and control of those intellectual property rights and developing it not as a tangible but an intangible. I think when you listen to the term here, you know, it's really about an intangible economy. I've said that before. I'll say it again. It's really where the wealth creation is going, is all in intellectual property. And one of the, you know, the big keys to making a lot of money with intellectual property, creating a lot of wealth, is controlling cash flow rights. That's what licensing IP is all about, is controlling the cash flow rights, okay? Because that's the real value in it. And there are many strategies that can be used, and this one that I'm going to talk two sides, especially if you're a joint venture partner, and it's used a lot by joint ventures. And what that is, it's basically getting the master license rights to an intellectual property, a trademark, brand, copyright. In this case, the example here is a deal that I did with the United States Marine Corps, which is obviously well known. It's a big brand, and you would be amazed many times at when you go to look at some licensing opportunities. Oftentimes organizations are not set up to be able to manage a licensing program. They just don't have the personnel. They only have 1 or 2 people in the office. And so one of the strategies that can be used is what's called a master licensee. And basically what a master licensee does is goes in, and in this case we went in and we got the rights to the brand for certain categories of products and services, okay, in certain channels of distribution. In this case it was the mass market. But what we also had the opportunity to do was is basically we have a license, we got a license that gave us the opportunity, our option, to make and sell certain products based on that license for that IP, but we also had the option to go out and relicense it to others to make products and services. And we, in effect, my client, in effect, became the manager of that IP, of those licensing. And so basically the way it worked is the master licensee gets the license, let's say, for 8%. So anything that you make and sell, you pay 8% back to the IP owner. And then when you sublicense it, you can sublicense it for 9, 10, 12, whatever you want. And what happens is you, as the master licensee, keep the difference between what you license it out for and what you owe the IP owner. In this case, it was 8%. So if you license licensee 1, 2, and 3 for 10, okay, you kept 2. This is something that can be a very, one of the most powerful strategies that you can use with licensing, especially comes the joint venture with the other parties. But the point here is if you recognize that working with has some excess capability and may have an opportunity to be able to acquire the rights to another intellectual property, not necessarily to have to make and sell it, but to control those rights and make money with it, you've got a powerful opportunity to leverage. It's called basically leveraging both sides. 1 is to make and sell products. 2 is to relicense it out. And it can be an incredibly lucrative strategy. And by the way, this strategy is a great one to use. If you're looking for a way, it's used a lot for companies that are looking to increase their value. Some of the uses for this master licensing strategy are: 1, if you're building a company, you want to build value in it, use a master license, because that license has not only value when you acquire it as a licensee, but also as you license out. And 2, if you're looking to raise capital, becoming a master licensee can be a very effective strategy. Master licensing deals are quite common amongst apparel companies, fragrance companies, anybody that's looking to get their brand or technology out there, but they just don't have the capacity. They hook up with a big partner who can get it out there. And it's a good one. So you think about the next time you're working with a partner, if you've got an opportunity here where acquiring the rights to a brand and relicensing out makes sense. If it does, you should definitely do it because you can make a lot of money with it.
And Rand, isn't it also true that you can sometimes control these rights for virtually no money? Like in real estate, for example, if you want to buy an option on a property, right, you might have to put down some earnest money or some deposit, and then if you decide not to exercise your option, you lose your earnest money or you lose your deposit. I could tell you, we could all both tell you story after story where people have controlled the rights of or $1 or some ridiculously low compensation because people are not doing anything with their intellectual property. You can find 95% of them. So isn't it also true? Isn't that also true? You could do that is actually
that is probably one of the strongest strategies you can use. You know, you can control intellectual property rights through options. You can control intellectual property rights through you don't necessarily need to put money on the table. Oftentimes, as a JV broker, you can control the rights by putting together a deal that says, look, if I bring you, based on a performance, if I bring you a deal, then what we'll do is transform this into a licensing deal and you'll get paid. And Mitch brings a really good point. There is so much intellectual property out there that oftentimes you can control it for little or no money, and it's a strategy that is used over and over again by a lot of savvy marketing companies. Especially, I can tell you that in a couple of master license worked on, especially on some of the smaller deals, like when I was working on the Maryland Pictures, I've had companies come to me, they want to get the master rights for certain categories. They want to be able to make and then also relicense, and you have to be careful with it. But where they were smart is what they would do is they already knew, much like Mitch was talking about the strategy of pre-selling and the previous strategy, is they would actually have already gone out to the market and kind of tested the market and pre-sold potential licensing partners on a certain IP before they actually laid any money out and signed a contract. And that's another way, that's another technique that can be used. There's many, many techniques that can be used to do this, but the key here is if you can control the rights, the money-making rights, that's where the real value and the real money is made in controlling those rights.
And so what we're doing here is we're really trying to give you a sense of the scope, the range of opportunity, the possibilities, you know, what's hidden literally in plain sight right underneath. Kind of exploding some myths here that says, you know, there's only one way to do things. And this is an example of what we would call value pricing versus commodity pricing or cost pricing. And again, this is a departure, but I'm sure you either have a book have an intellectual property you want to put into a book, or you know somebody who does. All right. Well, the traditional approach to writing a book is you write a book, you price the book, and then you go sell the book. Well, last year, the number was around 800,000 books were published, and a lot of them now are published, self-published. Next year, this year, next year, that number could double or triple, especially with the rise of Kindle. Kindle is now publishing a ridiculous amount of ebooks, and probably within 5 years, there'll be 10 million books a year being printed and published. It'll be so competitive. People will be driving prices down. They'll be. I wrote The New Game of Business in 2003. I didn't write it necessarily to become a bestseller. I wrote the book because I wanted to turn the book into a brand, and I wanted to be the highest paid guy in my niche. And so rather than printing up 3,000 copies and selling them for $10 a piece, which I could have and made $30,000, and by the way, virtually no books, well, very small percentage of books sell more than 500 copies. The average book sells less than 200 copies, and you realize you cannot make a living selling books. I knew that years ago. So what I did is I gave away my 3,000 copies. I gave them away strategically to people who I knew could either hand them to somebody. Long and the short of it is, instead of making $30,000 on 3,000 books and having 3,000 people read the book, I made $250,000 on what was inside the book. Okay? And again, realize that whatever form your intellectual property is, especially if it's know-how or wisdom or experience or a program like a training program or a manifesto, it's abundant and it's competitive and it's cost price if you sell it in that form. Whereas I literally had 10 chapters, I would disassemble and offer people the opportunity to buy a chapter or pay me to come in and train. So companies were paying me from $10,000 to $25,000, not for the book, but for what was in the book. And so I turned that book into a $250,000 windfall, whereas the vast majority of my colleagues had, 3,000 copies and 2,500 of them were still sitting in their garage. So begin to look at the form that you put your intellectual property in. Start to look at people you know who are authors who have books in their garage, and start to look at different ways that you can create value pricing based on the intellectual property and the cost pricing that you're stuck within the price range of a regular book. All right, and this can be done with almost every intellectual property. I use this as an example because it's such a prevalent example that you can relate to.
And Mitch makes a good point with this. Again, going back to intellectual property is all a way of having that mindset that thinks outside of these tangible forms and in ways in which you can create it into new forms. And that's really where you can create the opportunities. And one of the next strategies I want to share with you is a way that you can create big opportunities. Okay, and that is through bundling. You can bundle IP rights into a JV, and you can create big deals doing that. It's called co-licensing. Okay, and a co-licensing is basically where you go out and maybe you find a joint venture, maybe you've got a partner right now, and each party has an intellectual property that can work oftentimes you'll find that co-licensing can be used a good strategy. You can bring together two brands, create a whole new category of products and services, and make money doing it that way. Sometimes you have two products that can be bundled together and licensed out. Sometimes it's a brand and a product. Whatever the case is, you may be working with JV partners that have application. And in this case, when I was at the studios, co-licensing was just starting to come into the focus there. Not a lot of it was done, but in this case, when I was at Warner Brothers, it was in the early days. Many people don't realize, not even Major League Baseball had their licensing division organized back in the 80s. It was actually handled by the division of Warner Brothers that they melded in. But when I was there, we did a deal in which Major League Baseball agreed with Warner Brothers to bundle the Looney Tunes cartoons with Major League Baseball. And you'd say, well, wow, what could you possibly do with that? Well, the end was, what happened is, it's a very big, very big business. And so at that time in the 80s, the trading card business was changing very dramatically, and a lot of new trading card companies were coming in. One in particular was Upper Deck, who came in with the concept of, you know what, trading cards for years were being delivered by Topps in bubblegum packages for, 49 cents. What if we came in with a trading card and sold them for $1.50 or $2? And everybody would think, wow, this is crazy. Why would people want to double or triple? But they had spotted a trend in the market. So when they approached Warner Brothers, there wasn't really an opportunity on any of the products, and we had created this co-license deal, and I had spoken to them and said, what if you take this co-license between Major League Baseball and Looney Tunes? Now, these typically run higher in the royalty. It was about 12%. But the long and the short of it is they liked the idea, and because they were already working with baseball players, and they had some that were already working with them, we created this concept for comic ball cards where the artwork, and we bundled these together, put it together. The long and the short of it is they came out with this co-licensed product called comic ball cards and sold $30 million of product in 3 years, okay, just off of an idea of a co-licensing deal. And I share this story with you so you can get a sense of what you can do with this, is that when you combine two IPs together, it can be very powerful. And that's the same thing that you can do within a JV, is you should look inside these JVs. And by the way, when I say look inside the JVs, you may be working with 2 or 3 JV partners. Think about those partnerships, look inside them and say, are there any IP that they have right now that we could partner together in some form of a co-licensing deal? And again, you as the JV broker could sit right in the middle of this and get a piece of every single royalty that comes through the door as a result of that co-licensing JV.